Imagine waking up in your own home on a scorching summer morning. The heat is unbearable. Your body aches from food poisoning. And somewhere in the rooms around you, someone is waiting. Someone with an axe. On August 4th, 1892, in Fall River, Massachusetts, two people were brutally murdered in their home at 92 2nd Street. Andrew Borden, a wealthy businessman, and his wife Abby were found dead, their heads destroyed by repeated blows from a hatchet. The only suspect? Andrew's 32-year-old daughter, Lizzie Borden. You know the nursery rhyme, you've heard the legend. But the real story is far more disturbing, because it's not about ghosts or folklore. It's about money, family hatred, a sweltering August day, and a crime that should have been impossible to commit without leaving a single drop of blood on the killer. Lizzie Borden was tried for murder in one of the most sensational trials in American history. She was acquitted after the jury deliberated for just over an hour. But acquittal doesn't mean innocence. It means the prosecution couldn't prove guilt beyond reasonable doubt. This documentary separates verified facts from speculation, examines the actual evidence presented at trial, and asks the question that historians still debate. Did Lizzie Borden get away with murder? Who was Lizzie Borden? Lizzie Andrew Borden was born on July 19, 1860, in Fall River, Massachusetts. She was the younger of two daughters born to Andrew Jackson Borden and Sarah Anthony Morse Borden. Fall River in the 1890s was a booming textile manufacturing city. Factories lined the waterfront. Immigrants poured in looking for work. And at the top of this industrial pyramid sat men like Andrew Borden, wealthy, powerful, and deeply conservative. But Lizzie's early life was marked by loss. Her mother, Sarah, died when Lizzie was just 2 years old. Her older sister Emma was 12 at the time. The two girls grew up without a mother in a household dominated by their father's rigid control. 3 years after Sarah's death, Andrew remarried. His new wife was Abby Durfee Gray, a woman from a modest background who became stepmother to Emma and Lizzie. The girls never accepted her. They never called her mother. To them, she was always Mrs. Borden, or simply Abby. By 1892, Andrew Borden was worth an estimated $300,000, equivalent to roughly $10 million today. He had made his fortune in property, banking, and textile investments. He served as president of the Union Savings Bank and owned significant real estate throughout Fall River. But despite his immense wealth, Andrew was notoriously cheap. The family home at 92 2nd Street had no indoor plumbing, a luxury that most wealthy families in Fall River enjoyed by that time. The house was located not in the Hill, where the city's elite lived, but in a middle-class neighborhood near factories and working-class tenements. This frugality was a constant source of tension. Lizzie and Emma wanted to live like the wealthy young women they technically were. Andrew refused. He controlled every dollar. He decided where they lived, how they lived, and what they could spend. By 1892, Lizzie was 32 years old and unmarried, considered a spinster by the standards of the time. She was active in the Central Congregational Church, taught Sunday school, and participated in charitable organizations. To outsiders, she appeared to be a respectable, devout Christian woman of good standing. But inside 92 2nd Street, the Borden household was a pressure cooker. Family tensions and the days before the relationship between Lizzie, Emma, and their stepmother Abby had deteriorated over the years. Much of the conflict centered on money and property. In the years leading up to 1892, Andrew had purchased property and gifted it to Abby's family members. Lizzie and Emma saw this as theft, money that should have been their inheritance being given away to their stepmother's relatives. The sisters stopped eating meals with Andrew and Abby. They stopped speaking to Abby except when absolutely necessary. The house became a collection of people living under the same roof but completely estranged. Emma, the older sister, often left town to stay with friends, unable to bear the toxic atmosphere. But Lizzie remained, trapped by the social expectations of unmarried women in the 1890s and dependent on her father's wealth. Then came the days immediately before the murders. On August 2nd and 3, 1892, nearly everyone in the Borden household became violently ill. Andrew, Abby, Lizzie, and the maid Bridget Sullivan all suffered from severe vomiting and stomach pain. The family doctor, Dr. Bowen, was called. At the time, they suspected food poisoning, possibly from contaminated mutton that had been served for several days despite the oppressive summer heat. But Lizzie had another theory. She later told a friend, Alice Russell, that she believed the family was being poisoned deliberately. She expressed fear that someone, perhaps connected to Andrew's business dealings, wanted to harm them. There was also another strange incident. Just days before the murders, Lizzie attempted to purchase prussic acid, a deadly poison, from a local pharmacy, claiming she needed it to clean a sealskin cape. The pharmacist refused to sell it to her. This fact would later become a key point in the case against her. On the evening of August 3rd, an unexpected visitor arrived at the Borden home. John Vinicum Morse, the brother of Andrew's first wife, Sarah. Morse was Andrew's former brother-in-law and had business dealings with him. He arrived without luggage and was given the guest bedroom for the night. The stage was set. The household was tense. Everyone was recovering from illness. An unexpected guest was staying overnight, and the temperature outside was climbing toward what would be one of the hottest days of the summer. The morning of August 4th, 1892. Let's reconstruct the morning of August 4th, 1892, based on witness testimony and the timeline established during the investigation and trial. The day began early. By 6 a.m., the household was already awake. Around 7 a.m., Bridget Sullivan, the live-in maid, came downstairs and began preparing breakfast. The family gathered in the dining room: Andrew, Abby, John Morse, and Lizzie. Emma was not present. She had left days earlier to visit friends in Fairhaven, about 15 miles away, and would not return until after the murders. Around 8:45 a.m., John Morse left the house to visit relatives across town. Andrew Borden also left shortly after to attend to business downtown. Around 9 a.m., Abby asked Bridget to wash the windows, both inside and outside. It was already growing uncomfortably hot. Bridget, still feeling ill from the food poisoning, began the task reluctantly. Around 9:30 a.m., Abby went upstairs to the guest bedroom, the room where John Morse had slept the night before. What happened next would only be discovered hours later. But medical evidence would later suggest that sometime between 9:30 and 10 a.m., Abby Borden was attacked. She was struck from behind. The first blow likely came as she was bending over, possibly making the bed or tidying the room. Then came more blows. 17 to 19 strikes to the back and side of her head with a hatchet or similar sharp, heavy instrument. The attack was frenzied, brutal, and, most importantly, over quickly. Abby collapsed face down on the floor between the bed and the dresser. Blood pooled beneath her. She never had a chance to scream or defend herself. Downstairs, Bridget continued washing windows, unaware. Around 10:30 a.m., Andrew Borden returned home from his errands downtown. He tried his key in the front door but found it locked from the inside with multiple locks. He knocked. Bridget, still feeling ill and exhausted from her work, came to let him in. According to Bridget's later testimony, as she struggled with the locks, she heard Lizzie laugh from upstairs. It was an odd detail, one that Bridget remembered because it seemed out of place given the oppressive heat and general tension in the house. Andrew entered the house and asked for Abby. Lizzie told him that Abby had received a note asking her to visit a sick friend and had left the house. This was a lie. Abby was already dead upstairs. But Andrew, tired and hot, didn't question it. Around 10:50 a.m., Andrew Borden settled onto the sofa in the downstairs sitting room to rest. He removed his jacket. He lay down with his head on a pillow and his feet toward the door. Bridget, feeling desperately ill, asked Lizzie if she could go upstairs to lie down in her attic bedroom. Lizzie said yes. Andrew fell asleep on the couch. The house was quiet. Bridget was in her third-floor room. Lizzie was somewhere. And then it happened. Approximately 11 a.m., someone entered the sitting room where Andrew Borden lay sleeping. The attacker brought a hatchet down on Andrew's face and head with devastating force. 9 to 11 blows struck him. One blow split his left eye cleanly in half. Another crushed his nose. His skull was fractured in multiple places. Blood sprayed across the sofa, the wall behind him, and the floor. The attack was so violent that it must have taken only seconds. Andrew likely never woke up. His wounds were still bleeding when his body was discovered minutes later, meaning death had come very, very recently. Father's dead. The discovery. 11:10:11:15 m. Lizzie called out to Bridget, who was still resting in her attic room. "Maggie, come down quick. Father's dead." Somebody came in and killed him." Lizzie often called Bridget Maggie, the name of a previous maid, a detail that suggested emotional distance. Bridget rushed downstairs. She saw Andrew Borden's body on the couch, bloodied, mutilated, clearly dead. Lizzie, according to Bridget, was standing near the back door, calm but distressed. Lizzie told Bridget to go fetch Dr. Bowen, the family physician who lived across the street. Bridget ran to Dr. Bowen's house but found he wasn't home. She then ran to the house of a neighbor, Mrs. Adelaide Churchill. 11:13 a.m. Mrs. Churchill heard Bridget's cries and rushed to the Borden house. She found Lizzie standing at the side door. Mrs. Churchill asked where Lizzie had been when the attack happened. Lizzie gave an answer that would later be heavily scrutinized. She claimed she had been out in the barn loft looking for iron to make sinkers for a fishing trip. Mrs. Churchill asked about Abby. Lizzie replied that she thought she had heard Abby come back into the house, that Abby had received a note asking her to visit someone who was sick. At this point, no one knew Abby was also dead upstairs. 11:18 to 11:20 a.m. Dr. Bowen arrived. He examined Andrew's body briefly, confirmed he was dead, and covered him with a sheet. He asked Lizzie some questions, and they were alone together for approximately 1 minute. Around 11:20, 11:25 a.m., police officers began arriving at the scene. One of them, Officer Allen, found Lizzie sitting at the kitchen table, appearing shocked but relatively composed. Someone suggested checking upstairs for Abby. Bridget and Mrs. Churchill went up together. They entered the guest bedroom and found Abby Borden's body. She was lying face down on the floor, her head crushed by multiple blows. Blood had dried and congealed. The medical examiner later estimated she had been dead for about 90 minutes to 2 hours before Andrew, meaning she was killed first, likely around 9:30–10 a.m. The realization hit everyone at once. This wasn't a random intruder who had killed Andrew. This was a methodical, planned double murder. Abby had been killed first, upstairs, while the house went about its morning routine. Then, after Andrew returned home and fell asleep, he was murdered too. And Lizzie had been in the house the entire time. The investigation begins within hours. 92 2nd Street was swarming with police, medical examiners, reporters, and curious onlookers. News of the murders spread through Fall River like wildfire. Dr. William Dolan, the medical examiner for Bristol County, arrived around 11:45 a.m. He examined both bodies and made several critical observations. Abby had been dead significantly longer than Andrew, based on blood coagulation and body temperature. Both victims were killed with a similar weapon, likely a hatchet or similar sharp, heavy instrument. The attacks were extraordinarily violent, suggesting rage or determination. There was no sign of forced entry anywhere in the house. Nothing appeared to have been stolen. This last point was crucial. Andrew Borden was known to be wealthy. If this were a robbery, why was nothing taken? Why was Andrew's wallet, containing cash, still in his pocket? Police began questioning everyone in the household. Bridget Sullivan gave her account, Lizzie gave hers, and immediately, inconsistencies appeared. Lizzie's story kept changing. At first, she said she was in the kitchen when her father was killed. Then she said she was in the dining room. Then she said she was in the barn loft. She claimed she had been in the barn for about 20–30 minutes, looking for fishing sinkers and eating pears. But when police checked the barn loft later that day, they found it stifling hot, over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and covered in undisturbed dust. There was no evidence anyone had been up there that morning. Lizzie also claimed that Abby had received a note asking her to visit a sick friend, but no such note was ever found. No one ever came forward to say they had sent it. And then there was the question of the murder weapon. Police searched the house and found several hatchets in the basement. One had been recently broken and appeared to have been cleaned, but they couldn't definitively prove it was the weapon used. Perhaps most damning, Lizzie showed no blood on her clothing, not a drop. And yet anyone who committed these murders would have been drenched in blood. How was that possible? By the end of the day on August 4th, police had a theory. Lizzie Borden had murdered her father and stepmother, but proving it would be another matter entirely. The days after, Lizzie under suspicion. In the days immediately following the murders, the city of Fall River erupted in debate. Some believed Lizzie was innocent, a respectable Christian woman wrongly accused. Others were convinced she was guilty and had somehow managed to commit the perfect crime. On August 5th, police conducted another search of the Borden home. John Morse, the uncle who had stayed overnight, was briefly suspected and even pursued by an angry mob. But his alibi was solid. He had been across town visiting relatives when both murders occurred. On August 6th, the funerals were held. Andrew and Abby's bodies were displayed in open caskets, with Andrew positioned so only the undamaged left side of his face was visible. Lizzie and Emma attended, dressed in mourning black. But suspicion continued to build around Lizzie. An inquest was held, a closed legal proceeding where Lizzie was questioned for hours without a lawyer present. Her testimony was full of contradictions. She claimed not to remember key details. She changed her story multiple times about where she had been and what she had been doing. Then, on August 7th, 3 days after the murders, something happened that would later become a critical piece of evidence. Alice Russell, a family friend who was staying at the house to support Lizzie and Emma, witnessed Lizzie burning a dress in the kitchen stove. Lizzie claimed the dress was old and stained with paint, but Alice found it suspicious enough that she would later testify about it at trial. On August 11, 1892, exactly 1 week after the murders, Lizzie Borden was formally arrested and charged with 3 counts of murder: the murder of Andrew, the murder of Abby, and the murder of both together. She was taken to the Taunton jail, where she would remain for nearly 10 months awaiting trial. The case that would captivate America was about to begin. Lizzie Borden sat in a jail cell, accused of one of the most brutal crimes in American history. The evidence against her was circumstantial, but it was mounting. She had motive, a lifetime of resentment, and a substantial inheritance. She had opportunity. She was in the house when both murders occurred, and she had behaved suspiciously. Contradictory statements, a burned dress, and a story that didn't hold up under scrutiny. But there was one major problem for the prosecution. They had no direct evidence, no murder weapon definitively linked to her, no eyewitness, and most importantly, no blood. Not a single drop on her clothing or body. Behaved suspiciously. Contradictory statements, a burned dress, and a story that didn't hold up under scrutiny. But there was one major problem for the prosecution. They had no direct evidence, no murder weapon definitively linked to her, no eyewitness, and most importantly, no blood. Not a single drop on her clothing or body. On August 4, 1892, Andrew and Abby Borden were brutally murdered in their home at 92 2nd Street, Fall River, Massachusetts. Andrew's daughter Lizzie was in the house when both killings occurred. She gave contradictory statements to police. She burned a dress 3 days after the murders, and she stood to inherit a fortune. On August 11, 1892, Lizzie Borden was arrested and charged with murder. She sat in jail for nearly 10 months, waiting for her trial to begin. The press called it the crime of the century. Newspapers across America followed every development. And the question on everyone's mind was simple. Could a respectable Christian woman from a wealthy family really have committed such a brutal crime? The evidence against Lizzie. Before we enter the courtroom, let's examine what the prosecution had against Lizzie Borden, because understanding the evidence is key to understanding why this case remains debated more than 130 years later. Motive. The prosecution's theory was simple. Lizzie killed her father and stepmother for money and freedom. Andrew Borden was worth approximately $300,000 in 1892, equivalent to about $10 million today. Under Massachusetts law at the time, if Andrew died without a will, his estate would be divided among his surviving children and his wife. But if Abby died first, her share would go to Andrew, and then, upon his death, everything would go to Lizzie and Emma. This explained the order of the murders. Abby was killed first, between 9:30 and 10 a.m. Andrew was killed more than an hour later, around 11 a.m. If both died on the same day with Abby dying first, Lizzie and Emma would inherit the entire fortune. But motive alone doesn't prove murder. The prosecution needed more. Opportunity. Lizzie was in the house when both murders occurred. That much was undisputed. Bridget Sullivan, the maid, testified that she was washing windows outside around 9:30 a.m. when Abby would have been killed upstairs. She then went up to her attic room to rest around 10:50 a.m., just before Andrew was murdered. During both critical time windows, Lizzie had the opportunity to commit the crimes without being seen. But opportunity still isn't proof. The prosecution needed to show that Lizzie's behavior and statements pointed to guilt. Contradictory statements. From the very beginning, Lizzie's story kept changing. Where was she when her father was killed? First, she said she was in the kitchen. Then she said she was in the dining room. Finally, she settled on the story that she was in the barn loft, looking for sinkers for a fishing trip and eating pears. But when police checked the barn loft that afternoon, they found it stifling hot, over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and completely undisturbed. The thick dust on the floor showed no footprints. There were no half-eaten pears. It seemed impossible that anyone had been up there that morning. What about Abby? Where did she go? Lizzie told multiple people that Abby had received a note asking her to visit a sick friend, but no note was ever found. No one ever came forward claiming to have sent it. The prosecution would argue that Lizzie invented this story to explain why no one had seen Abby after she was murdered upstairs. The prussic acid incident. Just one day before the murders, on August 3, 1892, Lizzie attempted to purchase prussic acid, a deadly poison, from a local drugstore. She told the pharmacist she needed it to clean a sealskin cape. The pharmacist refused to sell it to her because prussic acid was a controlled substance. The prosecution would use this to suggest that Lizzie had initially planned to poison the family. When that failed, she turned to the hatchet. The burned dress. On Sunday, August 7th, 3 days after the murders, Alice Russell, a family friend staying at the Borden house, witnessed Lizzie burning a dress in the kitchen stove. Alice asked what she was doing. Lizzie said the dress was old, covered in paint stains, and taking up space. But Alice was disturbed. The timing seemed suspicious. Why would Lizzie burn a dress just days after a double murder, when police were still investigating? At trial, Alice Russell would testify about this incident, and the prosecution would argue that Lizzie was destroying evidence, specifically a dress that had been stained with her father's and stepmother's blood. The lack of an intruder. If Lizzie didn't commit the murders, who did? The house showed no signs of forced entry. Nothing was stolen. Andrew's wallet containing cash was still in his pocket. Abby's jewelry was untouched. The back door had been locked from the inside. The front door required multiple locks to open and was secured. The prosecution's argument: this was not a robbery. This was not a random intruder. This was someone who lived in the house, someone who knew the layout, knew the routines, and knew when Bridget would be out of sight. But despite all this circumstantial evidence, the prosecution faced one enormous problem: no blood. Lizzie was examined by police within an hour of the murders. There was not a single drop of blood on her clothing, her hands, or her body. And these were not clean, surgical killings. Abby was struck 19 times. Andrew was struck 11 times. Blood had sprayed across walls, floors, and furniture. The killer would have been drenched. So where was the blood? How could Lizzie have committed these murders, cleaned herself completely, changed clothes, and disposed of the evidence, all within minutes, without anyone noticing? The prosecution never had a good answer to this question, and it would prove to be their fatal weakness. The trial begins. June 1893. On June 5, 1893, nearly 10 months after her arrest, Lizzie Borden's trial began in New Bedford, Massachusetts. The trial was held at the Bristol County Superior Court. 3 judges presided: Chief Justice Albert Mason, Associate Justice Caleb Blodgett, and Associate Justice Justin Dewey. The jury was composed of 12 men, all white, all from respectable backgrounds. Women were not allowed to serve on juries in Massachusetts in 1893. This was significant. Many believed that an all-male jury would find it difficult to convict a woman, especially a respectable church-going woman like Lizzie, of such a brutal and unfeminine crime. District Attorney Hosea M. Knowlton led the prosecution. He was experienced, methodical, and determined. His strategy was to build a circumstantial case, showing motive, opportunity, suspicious behavior, and lies. But Lizzie had an extraordinary defense team. Her lead attorney was George D. Robinson, a former governor of Massachusetts, a man with political power, charm, and courtroom skill. Assisting him was Andrew Jennings, the Borden family's longtime attorney. From the beginning, the defense had a clear strategy: portray Lizzie as a victim, a virtuous Christian woman being persecuted by an overzealous prosecution, a woman incapable of such violence. The prosecution's case: Over the next several days, the prosecution called witness after witness. Bridget Sullivan testified about the morning of the murders, the layout of the house, and Lizzie's behavior. She described hearing Lizzie laugh as Andrew struggled with the locked door, a small but strange detail that suggested Lizzie was upstairs, possibly near where Abby's body lay. Dr. Edward Wood, a Harvard professor and chemist, testified about his analysis of the hatchet found in the Borden basement. He said it could have been the murder weapon, but he couldn't prove it definitively. The handle had been freshly broken off and there were traces of what might have been blood, but the tests were inconclusive. Alice Russell testified about the burned dress. She described Lizzie standing at the stove, tearing the dress apart and feeding it into the flames. Under cross-examination, the defense pointed out that Alice had waited months to report this, suggesting it wasn't as suspicious as it seemed. Emma Borden, Lizzie's older sister, testified for the defense. She described the family tensions but insisted Lizzie was not violent, not capable of murder. Emma stood by her sister completely. And then came one of the most controversial moments of the trial: the inquest testimony. After the murders, Lizzie had been questioned at a closed inquest, without a lawyer present. During that inquest, she gave rambling, contradictory answers. She claimed not to remember key details. She changed her story multiple times. The prosecution wanted to introduce this inquest testimony as evidence, arguing it showed Lizzie's guilt through her own words. But the defense objected. They argued that the inquest testimony was obtained unfairly, that Lizzie had been questioned without legal representation while under immense stress, and that allowing it would violate her rights. The judges agreed. The inquest testimony was ruled inadmissible. This was a massive blow to the prosecution. Some of the strongest evidence against Lizzie, her own contradictory statements, would never be heard by the jury. The defense's strategy. George Robinson's defense strategy was brilliant. He didn't need to prove Lizzie was innocent. He only needed to create reasonable doubt. And he did this by focusing on 3 points. 1. No blood evidence. How could Lizzie have committed these murders without getting blood on herself? The prosecution never explained it. The defense hammered this point relentlessly. 2. Character assassination of the prosecution's theory. Robinson painted the prosecution's case as absurd. The idea that a respectable Christian woman, a Sunday school teacher, a member of charitable organizations, could commit such savage violence was, he argued, preposterous. 3. The unfeminine nature of the crime. Robinson appealed directly to the jury's Victorian sensibilities. Women, he argued, were simply not capable of this kind of brutality. Lizzie was small, delicate, and refined. How could she have overpowered 2 adults, struck them dozens of times, and then calmly disposed of all evidence? In his closing argument, Robinson spoke directly to the jury. To find her guilty, you must believe she is a fiend. Gentlemen, does she look it? He pointed at Lizzie, dressed in black mourning clothes, sitting quietly at the defense table. The message was clear. Respectable women don't commit murder. And Lizzie Borden was a respectable woman. The verdict. On June 20th, 1893, after 13 days of testimony, closing arguments concluded. The judges gave instructions to the jury. They reminded them that circumstantial evidence could be powerful, but it must prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The jury retired to deliberate, and then, in just over 1 hour, about 66 minutes, they returned. The courtroom was packed. Reporters leaned forward. Lizzie sat stone-faced. The foreman stood. We find the defendant, Lizzie Andrew Borden, not guilty. The courtroom erupted. Some cheered. Others gasped. Lizzie reportedly showed little emotion. She simply nodded. She was free, but free doesn't mean innocent. It means the prosecution failed to meet the burden of proof. And many people, then and now, believe that Lizzie Borden got away with murder. Life after acquittal. Lizzie walked out of that courtroom a free woman, but her life would never be the same. She and Emma used their inheritance to purchase a large mansion on the hill, the wealthy neighborhood their father had always refused to live in. Lizzie named the house Maplecroft. It was everything 92 2nd Street was not: spacious, modern, elegant. But despite her wealth and freedom, Lizzie became a social pariah. Fall River Society, the same society that had once welcomed her into churches and charity organizations, now shunned her. Invitations stopped. Former friends crossed the street to avoid her. Whispers followed her wherever she went. She changed her name to Lisbeth and tried to live a quiet life. She developed an interest in theater and reportedly became friends with actress Nance O'Neill, which caused even more scandal and further estrangement from her sister Emma. Emma eventually moved out of Maplecroft around 1905, and the two sisters, who had been so close during the trial, never reconciled. Emma lived separately until her death in 1927, just days after Lizzie's own death. Lizzie Borden died on June 1, 1927, at the age of 66. She left money to the Fall River Animal Rescue League and other charities. Her funeral was small and private. She never confessed. She never spoke publicly about the murders, and she took whatever secrets she had to her grave. The house at 92 2nd Street today. Today, the house where Andrew and Abby Borden were murdered still stands at 92 2nd Street in Fall River, Massachusetts. It's now the Lizzie Borden Bed and Breakfast Museum, a place where tourists can tour the crime scenes, see original furniture and artifacts, and even spend the night in the rooms where the murders occurred. The house has been restored to look as it did in 1892. You can see the sofa where Andrew was killed. You can walk up the narrow stairs to the guest bedroom where Abby's body was found. You can stand in the basement where the hatchets were discovered. The museum doesn't take a position on Lizzie's guilt or innocence. It presents the facts, the evidence, and lets visitors draw their own conclusions. And every year, thousands of people visit, drawn by the mystery, the horror, and the question that still haunts this case more than a century later. Did Lizzie do it? Modern analysis. So let's address the question directly. Did Lizzie Borden murder her father and stepmother? The honest answer is, we'll never know for certain, but we can examine the evidence and the theories. The case for Lizzie's guilt. She had motive, a lifetime of resentment and a substantial inheritance. She had opportunity. She was in the house during both murders. Her story kept changing and contained obvious lies, the barn loft, the note to Abby. She tried to buy poison the day before. She burned a dress 3 days after the murders. No credible alternative suspect has ever been identified. The case for reasonable doubt. No blood was found on her clothing or body. No murder weapon was definitively linked to her. The prosecution's timeline was tight, almost impossibly tight, for her to commit the murders, clean up, change clothes, and hide evidence. Her behavior after the murders, while strange, could be explained by shock and grief rather than guilt. Modern theories. Some modern researchers have proposed alternative theories. Emma Borden, Lizzie's sister, had an alibi. She was in Fairhaven, 15 miles away. But some theorists suggest Emma could have returned secretly, committed the murders, and left again. This theory has very little supporting evidence. Bridget Sullivan. The maid had means and opportunity, but she had no motive, and her testimony was consistent throughout. Most historians dismiss this theory. A combination. Some suggest Lizzie and Emma worked together, or that Lizzie committed the murders but had help covering it up. Again, no solid evidence supports this. The most likely explanation, based on the available evidence, is that Lizzie Borden did commit the murders, but did so in a way that left just enough reasonable doubt for a jury of her peers, all men in Victorian America, to acquit her. The lack of blood remains the biggest mystery. Some theories suggest she wore protective clothing, an apron or smock, and discarded it. She committed the murders in the nude and washed immediately after. She changed clothes and burned or hid the bloodied garments before police arrived. But we'll never know for certain. The legacy of Lizzie Borden. The case of Lizzie Borden became a defining moment in American criminal justice and popular culture. It was one of the first trials of the century, a media sensation that captivated the nation. Newspapers published daily updates. People followed every twist and turn, and the verdict sparked debate that continues to this day. The case also revealed the deep sexism of the Victorian era. The defense's argument that a respectable woman couldn't possibly commit such violence worked because juries believed it. Women were seen as delicate, moral, incapable of brutality. This stereotype may have saved Lizzie's life. And then there's the nursery rhyme. Lizzie Borden took an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks. When she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41. It's not accurate. Abby wasn't Lizzie's mother, and the number of blows was different, but it embedded the case in American folklore forever. Books, films, TV shows, and plays have told and retold Lizzie's story. She's been portrayed as a victim, a villain, a feminist icon, and a cold-blooded killer. But the truth remains elusive. On August 4th, 1892, Andrew and Abby Borden were murdered in their home. Lizzie Borden was tried for their murders and acquitted. She lived the rest of her life as a wealthy woman in Fall River, shunned by society but never imprisoned. Did she do it? Probably. Can we prove it beyond all doubt? No. This documentary has presented the verified facts, the evidence, and the theories. We've separated what is known from what is speculation, and we've respected the memory of the victims, Andrew and Abby Borden, two people whose lives were brutally ended and whose deaths remain, officially, unsolved. Lizzie Borden took her secrets to the grave, and more than 130 years later, we're still asking the same question the jury asked in 1893. Did she do it? The answer may forever remain a mystery.